Hey, everyone. Cheers. It's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. I guess I've been away for a month. I didn't even realize so much time had passed. One or two people asked what was up, but probably most of you didn't even notice I was gone. So I didn't even notice I was gone. I was on a video or two on other channels during that month. I guess maybe just two. I don't know, or maybe three. But the big deal was I was on Surcam Stances, Marcus's channel, what is basically a Sleepy Reader video edited by Marcus. And so I highly recommend that if you want more Sleepy Reader. In fact, this is going to be my comic book reading diary from part of that month. I'll do another video later, hopefully, to catch up fully. But with Marcus, I did a video about these 4 issues of Captain America and the Falcon from my early childhood reading of Captain America, number 153, 154, 155, and 156. And this is, to my mind, there's nostalgia involved because it was one of the first long arcs. I guess it was the first long arc probably that I ever read as a kid in a comic, a 4-issue arc. Very early in my reading. I was probably 10 years old. And it involved a retcon from why there was a 1950s Captain America. It involved issues of racism and communism, the 1970s generation versus the 1950s generation, I believe. Anyway, it's all there in my video with Marcus, so I won't talk about these comics a whole lot. But it's totally a Sleepy Reader video. In fact, it's one I kind of had an idea for years and years ago. I was going to call it The KKK Took My Captain America Away. Then I realized I couldn't play that Ramones song. The one time I put a Ramones song in a video, it got taken down immediately. And then Comicsgate came along, and I didn't feel like doing this kind of comic that could be argued. Yes, there was political correctness. There was social justice warriors back in the 1970s comics, not just now. It was a whole thing with Comicsgate, and I just didn't want to get involved at that time. But I was super glad that Marcus gave me the opportunity to do it. And really cool seeing his editing. And I recommend everyone check out Marcus and check out his channel. And check him out on Lorenzo's channel. What's Lorenzo's channel called? I think Indie Comics and Review. And they do a great show every Wednesday, one of my favorite live shows. So check both of those channels out. And so the link will be below to that video and to the other channels. I was also on Naaman's channel, a comic Bookworm, I guess just a few nights ago, I think, or maybe a week ago, along with Metarog, the Old Geezers comic book show, I think Naaman's calling it, or Old Folks comic show, maybe. And we talked about the Mike Grell run on Legion of Superheroes, which was kind of a landmark for kids in the 1970s who liked Legion of Superheroes when Mike Grell was drawing it. But back to my comic book diary. Because I read these 4, I realized how much I loved Captain America and the Falcon. Together, they were an awesome team. And so I went back and I read a whole bunch from my Captain America collection, starting with Captain America and the Falcon number 149, which was either the second or third comic book I ever bought as a kid. And this is where I fell in love with Captain America and the Falcon. We'll look inside more, but I think that splash page totally captured my attention. And then I just loved the team of 2 sort of superhero friends, each with very different lives, but coming together to team up. I really loved that. And I think although I read Captain America on and off after Falcon left, it was that era with the Falcon that is the most special to me. And I think Captain America, because he's a bit of an abstract character, really did well with a solid character behind him. So this was the first, well, basically the first Captain America comic I ever read, and one of the first comic books I ever read, and it had a horrible cliffhanger. And only years later did I get to read the second half of the story in Captain America and the Falcon 150. And it's not nearly as good as the first half. And I remembered that from when I finally read it sometime maybe in the 90s. Rereading it now, I had the same impression that it starts off stronger than it ends. And then I read the intervening issues before 153, which are also sort of so-so issues. They're all written by Gary Conway, and I don't think his heart was really in Captain America. It feels like he was writing them very quickly. And then I continued reading the comics that came after those four, which are spotty. They have moments of interest, and lots of great art by Sal Buscema, and some interesting character beats, but also maybe the focus isn't quite there. The focus in those four issues that I covered on Surcam Stances channel was laser sharp and full of all kinds of layers, while still being kind of a kid's comic book. But a lot of these were not bad. I got these out of order. Here's 161 and 162. I think in 163 have form a story involving the return of Peggy Carter, and that gets kind of interesting. I don't know if it ever gets fully explored or not. We'll see as I continue to read it even more, because I plan to keep going with these. But issue 163 really impressed me a lot, and that's as far as I got. And in this one, there is a war veteran who's become a conscientious objector and will not commit violence of any kind. And that's a very interesting character and an interesting thing to explore with Captain America and the Falcon, I think, in the 1970s. And Steve Englehart himself, the writer, was in the Army. I don't know if he saw action in Vietnam. I'm not sure. But eventually announced himself as a conscientious objector and left the Army, apparently with an honorable discharge. I don't know how that works, because I thought usually they put you in jail if you're a conscientious objector. Or maybe they find volunteer work for you to do or something. It depends on the kind of conscience, or whether they believe you in your conscientious objection. And then sort of on a roll, I just had sitting around my office Defenders #3, which is by the same team of Steve Englehart and Sal Buscema. And I picked it up and started reading it without kind of any expectations. And I thought this was a really good kind of Doctor Strangey / cosmic-y kind of story with a lot of interesting things going on. So I'll explore those when I turn the camera around. I will also explore the other Bronze Age thing I got a hold of when I went. I'll have to talk about that maybe in another vlog or something. I should have talked about it right afterwards, because it's been almost a month, when I went up to Tacoma and hung out with Agu and Otaku Tour Guide, two people with other YouTube channels, and loved it. Had a great time hanging out with those guys. And oh no, you know what? I bought this at a sale. I'm sorry. I bought this at a. Did I buy it? Now I'm all confused where I bought different things, but I'm pretty sure I bought this at a sale where weirdly this comic book shop that's having financial difficulties nearby had a 75% off all back issues sale, 50% off of trades. It was insane. So I got this Howard the Duck Treasury Edition. I always like buying Treasury Editions if I don't already have them, or if I find them in better shape, because some of mine are pretty ragged. This is kind of it's a nice reader copy, I guess I'd call it. But this one has often they're just reprints. This one has an original story by Steve Englehart, and I think again Steve Englehart, sorry, Steve Gerber, because if you want Howard the Duck, it has to be written by Steve Gerber. By Steve Gerber, with art by Sal Buscema, and wonderfully Claus Janson inking. And it was a really, really cool story. So I'll also take a dive into that. And then I thought I'd show you, I've read a scattering of new comics or modern comics during this month, not a whole lot, but I thought I'd show you what I read and actually put it into a countdown format like before, even though these are from all over the place. In fact, so there's 9 of them. I enjoyed every single one of them. And I feel bad putting one in last place. But in last place is a modern one, I think from 2011, called Tomb of Dracula Presents Throne of Blood. And this is a one-shot, but it's part of some ongoing Dracula kind of thing they had going on at Marvel at the time. I totally missed it at the time. But the Dracula in here doesn't look at all, and I don't even know if his personality is at all like Dracula of, the Tomb of Dracula days, although this is called Tomb of Dracula Presents Throne of Blood. And isn't Throne of Blood a name of a famous Japanese movie that adopts Macbeth, I want to say? Anyhow, that's an aside. Dracula has long silver hair and is kind of some kind of, I don't know, leader of a whole world of vampires in a more sort of organized way than I remember it being ever in the Marv Wolfman books. But anyway, this was really fun. Cool art by Parloff. What's his first name? Victor Parloff? No. Goran Parloff. The cover here is by Brian Hitch. Kind of both an ugly and a cool cover. I don't know. But it's not a story about Dracula. Dracula's in the background, I guess, but it's almost like a fable about in medieval Japan when a vampire was encountered. And I think that vampire in here will resurface elsewhere, if I understand correctly, or one of the characters who becomes a vampire at the end. Then I picked up the 3rd issue of Purple Oblivion. I loved the first 2 issues. This one I liked, but maybe the love wasn't as high. It was the focus more was on the gruesomeness. Oh, actually, I'll turn the camera around later. So I ranked that at number 8. And then an interesting thing, a short hardback called Nexus Nefarious, written by Mike Barron, but without Steve Rude as the artist. The artist is Richard Bonk. And it was a fun story. It seemed like a light little side story for Nexus. My understanding is Steve Rude and Mike Barron have agreed to go separate ways, but they both can do Nexus stories. So it'll be interesting to see. I definitely miss the artist. Richard Bonk was fine, but I missed the magic of Steve Rude. He could have brought this story up to a much higher level. But I do think Mike Barron is a good writer. I know some people associate him with the Comics Gate movement, but I didn't see anything in this story to concern me that way in terms of politics getting nasty or anything. Then in at number 6, I'm putting Pink Lemonade. I enjoyed this a lot of interesting artwork. That's kind of what shines here. He explores all these different artworks inside the past of this character, Orange. I forget what his name is. Orange OJ Bot. So a fun issue. Issue 6, was supposed to be out, but my shop didn't have it. So I'm going to have to search around, or maybe the shop will get it this Wednesday. So this is one of the ones that I wanted to, and I think issue 6 is the end of the series. I wanted to complete it, even though my pull list is gone. Another thing I'm going to keep going with, at least for a while longer, from my pull list from my old pull list, is Lord of the Jungle, which is Tarzan. I guess they can't put the name Tarzan on the cover, but inside he's called Tarzan. And I still think this is kind of an excellent synthesis by writer Dan Jurgens, kind of modernizing but staying true to the spirit of the old Tarzan stories. So really a big thumbs up for the writing on this for me. The art, if it were in black and white, I'd give it a big thumbs up. I hate the coloring. We'll see a little bit of that. Santos Sisters, just fun and funny and kind of an Archie Comics style that if you like the Archie Comics style, it's a very good take on that style. And they use it for their own sense of humor and stuff, but it definitely it starts with Archie, if you know what I mean, and goes on from there. So that was Santos Sisters was at number 4. Art Brut, I'm putting in at number 3. The story continues to be really good, and I'm really hoping they do more stories. I think there's just one more issue, so another one I'm sticking with till it's done. It's fun. It's much lighter than their Ice Cream Man book, but I'm really enjoying it. It's really wacky, and I love the little backup that they have at the end, which with a retro Art Brut story. And then Human Target number 11. This, I keep waiting for me to not like it because I have a history of not liking Tom King books, but I keep liking it more. One more issue to go, so of course I'm going to get it. Plus it is more expensive, but I like the cardboard covers, and I like reading it in a serialized format. I think it's really ideal for that. Or some Tom King books might be better in trade, I suspect. And finally, good in any format you can get it, Sergio Aragonés's Gru, Gods Against Gru, number 3. I'm not sure if this is going to be 4 issues or 6 issues. I'm afraid just 4, so I'm sad. When will I get my next Gru after that? But, everything good I always say about Gru is still true here. And I kind of marvel because I'm not quite sure of Sergio's age, but I know he's kind of up there, and a lot of artists lose their touch at some point, or their hand gets shaky or something, or they're burnt out. But Sergio just keeps going and going. The crowd scenes, the detail, the creativity on every page is fantastic. So that's really cool. I think I'll break this up into a bunch of chapters. You've probably already seen that. I should have said that at the beginning of the video, of the Bronze Age books and the new books and looking inside each. All right, let's start with this stack of Bronze Age Captain America. Skipping over those ones that I covered in the other video on Marcus's channel. But, it's self-indulgent, a very early nostalgic comic for me. I do think this is a really cool splash page. I noticed while looking through all the various comics that Sal Buscema really had that Sal Buscema look in some panels, and then other panels seem more generic. And I noticed that going through, but as time went on, it seemed like there was more iconically Sal Buscema looking panels. But also, I was reading in an introduction to one of the collections, this wouldn't count for this issue, but for some later issues, occasionally Steve Englehart would go in himself and redraw certain panels when he got new ideas. And I think I could spot some of the really sort of flat, less dynamic panels, which I suspect were the ones redrawn by by Englehart. But this is Jerry Conway. So the fun of this is kind of, at least for me as a kid, establishing some of the relationship between the Falcon and Captain America, but also the tension of like whose mission is more important and who cares more about the other one's mission. I think the Falcon's a little miffed that Cap doesn't want to help him, or maybe the other way around. But eventually, the two mysteries they're working on end up pairing up and being part of the same mystery. The other thing is just the fun of the super cheesy Batroc character. And maybe in the modern times where you feel like you have to do a more realistic Frenchman rather than this ridiculous Batroc Ziliper, you couldn't have this kind of fun. Or maybe you could. I don't know. And it's crazy. He has this long fight with Captain America and then calls out his brigade, Batroc's brigade, who've just been waiting silently in the other room for their chance to fight Captain America. Throughout all of these, there's just so much exciting dynamics with Sal Buscema. Obviously, the idea of the really dynamic visual action in Marvel Comics came initially from Jack Kirby, and Stan Lee would ask the other artists to study how Jack did it. But both John Buscema and Sal Buscema, in their own ways, took that Kirby style and then went with it and made it their own. And Sal Buscema, in particular, really has a feel for action and excitement. And all of these comics are non-stop fights. It's pretty amazing. So this one, spoilers, ends with a cliffhanger where it turns out that Batroc and his crew are kidnapping children to be taken away by the Stranger. And so then that's where I was left as a kid. It's like, oh my God, some alien Superman is stealing children from Earth. How can this be? It's too awful to even think about. The child buyer. So then I rushed out and subscribed to Captain America and the Falcon and did not get this issue or the following 3 issues. It was 4 issues later that my subscription began. Luckily, it began with a really good series. But so it was only long afterwards where I found this issue in a used comic book store, maybe the late 80s, maybe the early 90s. I think it was in the late 80s, like 89, 90, when me and my friend Bruce were hanging out in Boston and realizing we could go to comic book stores and get all the back issues we used to wish we had. And I think that might be when I picked this one up. So quickly, the Stranger turns out to be this other guy from some doomed planet, and he has a scheme to use children to bring back the zombified people on his planet back to life. And the whole sort of science fiction attempt at cosmic Jack Kirby kind of stuff goes off the rails, and it was kind of a weak issue. There could have been some fun with, I noticed I think they're coloring Batroc's outfit differently in this issue. But anyway, they kind of could have had fun with their teaming up with Batroc, who now, I guess the color just got a little darker, but it's roughly the same, who now regrets, he thought it was just, kidnapped for ransom, and knowing that it was children, I guess, having their life essences used. Now, how a couple dozen children's life essences could bring back the whole planet, a whole planet's population, I don't know. But you weren't meant to think about this very much. And, maybe I would have loved it anyway as a kid just because it might have been an early exposure to one of these sort of crazy cosmic stories. But it seemed like to me now, it seemed like a bad fit with Captain America. And it seemed just very hastily put together. I'm guessing Jerry Conway was writing a lot of comics at the time. Should be noted that during this era, Sal Buscema was drawing at least 2 comics a month and inking Conan. This one is totally unmemorable. Some villains attack. They have some reason for attacking. I can't even remember. It involves S.H.I.E.L.D. in some way. And it ties in, it ties into the plot of coming out of some other comic, and it doesn't really get wrapped up here, and I don't know if the full story got wrapped up in some other comic book. Still lots of great artwork, and I do think I got a hold of these issues at some point in my childhood. Perhaps at one point, like one year I lived in Hawaii, and there I had a friend with a giant box of comics. I might have read his. Or also sometimes there was this farm. I lived in a very rural area. There was this farm stand where they sold comics, old comics, for a dime a piece. They were just in a pile in a box. And boy, did I always wish my parents would go to that farm stand. But and I can remember them hurrying me up as I poured through the box, trying to pick out what I could get. Maybe I had $1, maybe I had 50 cents, so I could get 5 or 10 comics. So anyway, all of this is just kind of space filler, and then Steve Englehart came in with this set of comics, and it was amazing. And then Steve Englehart kind of, in my opinion, slowed down a bit, or pulled back from more controversial stuff, at least for a while. I guess he was trying with this. I'm missing one of the issues. I have it, but I can't find it. But with this villain Venom, this is the part 2 of it, who works in advertising and speaks in advertising slogans, which is just odd and didn't really go anywhere. It could have been more of a commentary. It was a slight jab at a commentary. And meanwhile, we have the other plot, which is there's I forgot what he was called, some secret kind of villain, leader of villains, who is suspected to be a member of the police officers, which is kind of an interesting, could have been an interesting exploration of corruption amongst the police. It's just kind of glossed over pretty quickly, I would say. So, as usual, lots of fun action. It's silly, but I love that part of the Falcon, again, kind of a sense of teamwork. He has this pet Falcon who he talks to and he has a relationship with, sort of, is like his best friend, other than Captain America. And the Falcon often comes in and saves the day, or, tips the balance, and I really enjoy that. So then, I guess this issue was the climax of the whole thing, where ultimately we find out that, was it in this issue? I don't know. Somehow that police officer, who's kind of like an old school conservative, I think this plotline's a long running one, and I don't think he was originally intended to be the villain. Muldoon, I think his name is. But he ends up being revealed as this guy. What is he called? The Cowled Commander. He has very muscular legs. He's kind of a pot-bellied older guy once it's revealed. But somehow he's got all these minor level supervillains working for him, and it's a whole thing. It's okay. I think I probably thought it was pretty deep as a kid. And maybe, again, I think there's that sense of a generational conflict in Steve Englehart's work. So that Muldoon, the Cowled Commander, represents the failed previous generation who, despite originally having ideals, has become corrupted, perhaps. Then there was this really silly supervillain, Solar. I mean, he looks cool enough. But he's just a hippie who went hiking in the desert and spent too long in the desert. Let me see if I can find that origin story. He spent too long in the desert, and that gave him sun powers, but apparently drove him insane also. I don't know. Now there's, my generational idea. Here now we have kind of an environmental hippie gone wrong. So it kind of reverses that idea that it's generational kind of issues going on here. In Captain America, again, as I kind of talked about in Marcus's channel, I think he represents in a way both the ideals of the 70s here and the ideals of the 1940s if they hadn't been corrupted. And I think that's a nice factor. I can't remember if it's in this issue or another one where Leela, the young African American lady who has a possible interest in a relationship with Sam Wilson and with the Falcon separately, and with the maybe it's another issue, and with the kind of Black Panther-like character in Harlem named Rafe. So she has three men, even though two of them are the same man in her life. They have a big make-out scene. Maybe that's the next issue. I don't know where it went. Where I'm not going to be able to find it. If he lost his soul. So, yeah, there's a running plot about Nick Fury and his jealousy of Captain America and the conflict. That's probably not worth going into at the moment because I've got so much to cover. Here's the Falcon beating up a whole crew of... They're somewhere between the Black Panthers and a gang, or maybe they're just a gang and the Black Panthers are separate. I'm not sure. And Leela's watching the fight, and clearly she is turned on by the big man who can beat up everyone else, which I kind of have mixed feelings about. But she wants Falcon to go against working with the white superhero, the Man, and not be his sidekick. The Falcon has to kind of stuff it, Lisa. Just shut up for a minute. Falcon has to stick to his guns and, continue to work with Captain America because they are great friends. Cap and Leela, my two extremes. Will my loyalty always be torn between them? And Leela's thinking, I'll never stop trying to change you, baby. What's Cap thinking? So I pulled part of my life back together. Sam's with me again for the time being. But what about Sharon? And this event, we get kind of plunged into a gothic story in a mansion that's also kind of a psychiatric, a creepy psychiatric institute, and a mysterious patient who is Sharon's sister. So, and eventually gets revealed, in this issue or the next issue, she gets revealed to be Captain America's old girlfriend from World War II, Peggy Carter, who is Sharon's older sister. So there's a big age gap between the two, 20 years perhaps. So that gets kind of interesting as the curtain gets pulled back. And there's one thing about Cap is we're always getting referred back to World War II. In this case, it's a bunch of flunkies of the crazy psychiatrist who are recreating World War II to, I guess, try to drive them crazy. I guess this guy Dr. Faustus has appeared elsewhere, but this is the only time I've ever read about him. So basically, Peggy Carter has been in a kind of fugue for 20 years or more. So she ends up being a woman out of time, like Cap is a man out of time, only she has aged. I guess that's more featured in the next issue. She doesn't really quite realize that she's an old woman and Cap's a young man now. And that was really interesting. And let's see. Would Cap and Falcon stay with me for a while? So let's see. Anyway, on to the next issue. This is the last of these issues that I read so far, 163, and I really loved this issue. Some of these characters were fighting Cap quite a while, earlier in this little run here, and they've broken out of jail and come to get Captain America, because that's what you do. You get revenge on the person who put you in jail. But meanwhile, so now Peggy has a different hair color, I just noticed here, and maybe looks even a bit more matronly. And I can't. So she doesn't know that Captain America is now dating her very young sister. I can't bear deceiving her, not telling her that Cap isn't still in love with her, that he loves me, her sister. But she needs time to adjust. Poor Steve, he hates it as much as I do. So yeah, she's just come out of this fugue, and so they're chatting and about how to adjust after all this time, and then Peggy sees her reflection and realizes she's an old woman, and that's when they meet this war resister who lost his arm in Vietnam and was in a POW camp, but now is anti-violence. So I think he's kind of speaks, at least in part, for Steve Englehart. Ironically, in these comics, which are just nonstop violent action. But, and yeah, right here in Counterpoint, we have the, is he the eel or the electric eel? The eel, saying, violence is the only way. The law can do what it wants with me, but jailing you, my brother, is something else. So it turns out the eel and Venom are brothers, even though they have different last names. So it explains how they changed their names, or one of them changed his name when he went into advertising. Just love Buscema's artwork, and his portrayal of what might otherwise be silly villains just really really clicks. And Falcon is trying to talk about his problems, of course, and then the villains attack. And after a bunch of violence, we end up at the non-violent guy's cottage, and the villains attack there. And there's a big scene where even when they're beating him up and stuff, he won't fight back and he won't give away the information. But then Captain America arrives. Pretty intense stuff. I mean, he's basically being tortured in a sense, but I guess I wouldn't have perceived it that way as a kid. And interestingly, here we have a whole sequence where Captain America's hands were burned by acid, and so he's all bandaged up and he has to fight with the other parts of his body, elbows and legs and stuff, which is pretty cool. And the Falcon shows up. And kind of, in a weird way, in a way that I probably related to as a boy, Captain America and Falcon bond by getting into lots of fights together. And of course, Red Wing, the Falcon, to the rescue. So I think eventually they drop Red Wing, and the Falcon could fly or glide around a bit, and I think that was a mistake. Kind of the sense that the Falcon, working with less superpowers than Captain America, keeps up, partially because he's so determined and partially because he's got the Red Wing to help him out. So Captain America promises he's going to teach Peggy all about 1973. So we'll see. I'm curious to see whether they follow up on that, because this is, and whether the conscientious objector returns. I don't think he will, but that made this a really interesting issue to me. And then immediately after reading that issue, I read Defenders #3, which has even better Sal Buscema art. It's inked by Jim Mooney, and I noticed on on a John Buscema comic, Jim Mooney sometimes can have kind of a heavy hand as an inker, but with John Buscema and with Sal Buscema, at least in the two examples I looked at, he really inked it the way they would have, or inked it the way Sal Buscema would have. The way it looked very similar to John Buscema, inked by Sal Buscema. So I think that Mooney is really capturing the feel of Sal Buscema here more than applying Jim Mooney over Buscema for whatever reason, either because he respected Buscema's artwork or he was just trying to be true to it at that time and later had a heavier hand over other artists. But in this, the team decides to all travel together through a mystic realm in hopes of freeing the Silver Surfer from planet Earth where he's trapped, and it's kind of moving how the Submariner and the Hulk, who are seemingly kind of negative. Oh, and also there's this funny scene where the Submariner rolls around in snow to revive his water powers, but kind of moving how the Hulk decides to come along because the Silver Surfer calls him a friend. Basically, Hulk would do anything for someone who calls him a friend. I like comics about friendship, I guess. And so then they travel through this realm, and as they're traveling through this mystical realm, they discover this woman who, Barbara, who sacrificed herself for Doctor Strange many long months ago, apparently in Hulk 126. So I have to dig that up. Those of you in the know she will eventually become the Valkyrie. I just spoiled it, I guess. But they free her from this mystic prison she's trapped in, and they're struggling. They get caught in this mystic tornado. And there's a whole struggle where Submariner kind of swims through this substance of the tornado and grabs onto the Silver Surfer's board, and the Hulk is holding them, keeping them from being sucked through the anomaly or black hole or whatever it is. It's great kind of teamwork stuff. I just love this. I just think this is real peak Sal Buscema artwork, by the way. So they're all working as a team, and then, let's see, this demon shows up, and it turns out that Barbara has become physically part of the demon. Like, it has 3 heads, and one of the heads is hers. And so she did that because basically she thought she'd never leave this realm, and better to join with the demon than just be lonely for the rest of eternity. So that was an interesting twist. Big battle with the 3-headed demon. Ultimately, the various parts get separated somehow so that they can defeat them, if I'm remembering correctly. And they rescue Barbara anyway. Even they say she's gone mad. She was forced to mate with the monster god. So she mated with it and became part of it. That's kind of weird. So we end with this mad woman screaming, and the surfer. Oh, and when they come out of the mystic realm, they discover they have not been able to surmount the barrier around Earth, and the surfer's still trapped on Earth. And he gets whiny about it, trapped like a rat on this insane planet. I mean, how insane is Earth for a guy who went around helping a giant god devour planets all around the universe? So everything has ended in disaster. But I thought it was a brilliant comic, actually. Again, in this over-the-top Marvel way. But I really enjoyed that. Get down, America. Let's wrap up this look at Bronze Age Sal Buscema with a look at this Howard the Duck Treasury, which it delighted me, actually, because I didn't realize it would be more than just reprints. A 26-page original story by Steve Gerber that starts with prologue, 5 villains in search of a plot, which I love. What is it, a famous play called 7 Characters in Search of a Plot? And so we have these ridiculous villains sitting bullseye. What was her name? Tilly the Hun. The Spanker. Former headmaster of an exclusive private prep school. And then this guy, the Black Hole, which is really crazy. And we see them in action against some police, and then the Black Hole sucks all the police inside. And Tilly the Hun says, "That's the most repulsive thing I've ever seen." "Yeah, awful, ain't it?" says the Black Hole. I really would like to see these villains again. I wonder if they showed up in any other comic. And then they're approached by this guy. What was his name? Does he say his name? he wants to lead them. They need good publicity. Dr. Angst, master of mundane mysticism. So they need good publicity, so they decide they need to assassinate Howard the Duck, who is currently running for president. And we have this great splash page of Howard getting kicked out of a fancy hotel because his campaign has no money. And he and Beverly decide to go down to Greenwich Village because Beverly has some friends who live there who might be able to put them up. And on the way, they pass Mary Jane and Peter Parker, who I guess has already had an adventure with Howard and Beverly. And he almost gives away the fact that he knows them. And then Mary Jane gives them directions of where they want to go. And they accidentally knock on Doctor Strange's door. And I love this bit where Beverly thinks that Nighthawk is the Falcon. And so Nighthawk, seeing a talking duck, assumes their visitors could only be for Doctor Strange. But they say they don't need a doctor. Anyway, and there are just all the Defenders hanging out in the mansion, glowering at them. And Doctor Strange doesn't let them go because he thinks he can help Howard. He can tell Howard's from a different dimension. And when the villains attack... Anyway, as I mentioned, I love this art. Klaus Janson and Sal Buscema are a fantastic team. So Doctor Strange wants to help Howard get back to his world. But that's when they get attacked. And by accident... How does it work out? By accident, Howard ends up with Doctor Strange powers. And Doctor Strange is immobilized, and Howard needs to use Doctor Strange's powers to save the day against this group. I can't remember why, but they end up in a football field fighting, and the mundane magic, I guess, involves things like giant sewing needles and stuff. And then they're about to all be sucked into this black hole guy. But it's Beverly who pushes him inside his own hole. And then he's just a hole, I guess. Anyway, this is a really, really fun Howard the Duck. I assume it must be reprinted somewhere in Howard the Duck collections, but it's really nice if you can find a copy in this large treasury size edition. It's really cool. But I'm trying to remember why. Yeah, so they get all the police out of the hole of the black hole. So Doctor Strange just says, "Which brings us back to you, friend Duck, and your mystic journey. Skip it, Doc. Just let me nap a while, okay? Then you can loan me a $1 for the journey back uptown on a bus, huh?" So kind of a lame thing where he just doesn't like magic, so Howard is not going to go back to the world he thought of. There's Howard for President, Howard the Duck Extra, and then there's reprints. All right, now let's take a look inside the modern comics I read this past few weeks. First off, there was Tomb of Dracula Presents Throne of Blood. And I think I mentioned that I could only find a few other comics that kind of related to this. I think there might have been some kind of event going on. I don't know if there was a series of one-shots. So this is what Dracula looks like in this world. So very, very different than the one based on Bela Lugosi. I don't know if this is based on something in particular, but kind of. But that's just a framing device to tell this story of two brave warriors who fight against a sort of demonic vampire lord who's been, going across the country defeating everyone's armies. And they do eventually defeat him, but one of them gets bitten, and it's sort of about what that does to their relationship and family when one becomes a vampire. And turns one of these characters into a character that is supposed to continue on into modern times, I think, into the rest of the larger vampire story that they have going with Dracula. But I just don't know how much of this was followed up on. So anyway, it's an interesting comic book, written by Victor Gischler, a name I hardly know, but he did a good job, obviously helped by the great art of Goran Parloff. Pure Oblivion. Trigger warnings here, I guess, if you don't like gross things. Definitely pushed the grossness up to a new level. Still kind of a fun comic, but I enjoyed it when it was more psychedelic and a little less totally horrific. Maybe I'll leave it there. I'm a longtime Nexus fan. I don't know if this Nexus Nefarious would have much meaning to just the average person coming along and stumbling upon it. They'd probably, like me, find it kind of interesting but not major kind of experience as far as a read goes, with a few mysterious touches, such as this manta ray-like creature flying through space, which is never really explained within the book itself. When Steve Rude drew these kinds of things, it added a layer of sort of humor, and I don't know, it gave it a different vibe. So the vibe just completely changes with this different artist. And it seems unfair to compare. There's a good shot, though. It seems unfair to compare him to Steve Rude, and yet, how can I not? Because the vast majority of Nexus stories are drawn by Steve Rude. I'll be interesting. I don't know if this will do well enough, because I would like to see if Mike Baron has more Nexus plans up his sleeve. Now, I thought I didn't like the art, but in the back are examples in black and white, and I like them much better. So I didn't perceive that the colorist was not doing a good job, but when I see the black and white art, it is much more pleasing to my eye. So something was lost in the coloring experience. So I've never heard of this Richard Bonk before. It's an interesting comic book. I mean, it's really only like 50 or 60 pages long for $18, but it is a hardback. I didn't feel like it was a bad deal, but might not be for everybody. Pink Lemonade continues to just be super fun, and in this issue we kind of explore the past of Pink Lemonade's own favorite character, OJ Bot, who has been in comics and anime and movies, and so they travel through these different iterations of OJ Bot's life, which allows them to, I guess, get to the point where OJ Bot can save Pink Lemonade, and then Pink Lemonade can save the day, like recharging OJ Bot. So it's a really cool comic that is not, it just feels light, and yet there's an aspect to it that's not light, I guess. But it's also kind of a spoof on pop culture, but again in such a gentle, pleasant way. Next issue, Sanctity or Sanctimony. And there's a sense of humor here that is also kind of hard to describe or put your finger on. So it's a nice, unique comic. Lord of the Jungle, like I said, I just like Dan Jurgens' take on the character. He spins a tale that takes place in the present when Tarzan is old, narrated by this African who's his friend, and then we, in this issue, flash back to when he and the African first, ads are so distracting, when he and the African friend first met, and it ties in with the early lore of Tarzan and how he was raised by the apes and his first encounters with evil white hunters. So it works pretty well. I mean, there's no way around the myth of Tarzan and the fact that it's a white man who's Lord of the Jungle. But I think it softens or makes more reasonable that aspect of it, and tells a good story. My objection here again is the color. I really enjoy the art by I have trouble remembering his name. The art by Benito Gallego, but the coloring seems to really lessen the impact of the art, which is a shame. This old school kind of art deserves some old school style coloring. And you can see it's worse in the modern sequences in terms of the color obscuring things, because things get in the flashbacks, maybe because they're in the jungle instead of the city, everything's a bit lighter, but still with a darker sort of haze over it than is necessary. As you can see, very, very Sal Buscema and Joe Kubert-like art here, which is very pleasing. Covers, though, by someone else do not work for me. Santos Sisters, just a bunch of goofy jokes that really work. Kind of, I don't know, Underground Comics meet Archie Comics, but in a very gentle way. So I'm surprised they've made it 3 issues, but I look forward to more. Maybe it's selling well enough, and the team behind it, the 2 creators, where are they listed here? No, I forgot. There they are. Greg and Fake. Hopefully those 2 creators it's worth their while and they can keep at it. So we got spoof on Jocks, spoof on really old comics. And somehow, although these characters are kind of shallow, the 2 main characters, they're the Santos Sisters, they're also somehow likable. They have a energy to them that makes them very enjoyable. And they've got this character that's like a joke on He-Man. So yeah, overall, really, really pleased with this comic. Ages 13 plus, be prepared to show ID. Iconic 3rd issue. Yeah, so they know how to hit all those comic book marks. And then I really have nothing new to say about Art Brut. I guess it's delving a little deeper into a horrific aspect of its story, and delving a little further into the notion of the character going insane because of his time spent within the artwork. And we get to explore the Scream. I wasn't so crazy of the idea of the Scream as being this nice source of information, but anyway, overall, it's a very cool comic. Definitely sticking with it to the end. And sticking with it to the end on Human Target. Each issue is its own little beat of of Tom King playing with a different idea. Now here we kind of have the cards are on the table now. He knows who killed him because he's going to die in another day, and they're in love, or are they in love? I'm starting to question that. I'm starting to question what's really going on here in terms of their emotions now that we know the facts of the case, so to speak. And I'm really curious how Tom King will play it at the end. Again, why did they put the ads in the middle of the story? So it's a day at the beach, I guess you would call this issue. It's another good one. And Grell, I just wanted to show you how detailed all the art gets. Maybe he's challenging his new colorist by doing endless crowd scenes that the colorist is going to have to handle. And it's again a joke on religion as an opportunistic kind of thing. Everyone's looking for how they can make money off of religion and how they can steal gold or get people to give them donations because of the religion. And the use of war as a tool also. But there's always war in Grell, I think, because Grell loves to fray. He loves to fight. But endless creativity and just visual creativity from Sergio Aragonés. As always, everybody has a different interesting hat. During this series, I've just been noticing everyone's hats. But let's see if I can find one of the pictures of the gods. The gods all have interesting headdresses or hats. It's weird, since everyone is so greedy, it makes Grell seem less greedy, although all he cares about is food and fighting. He's quite greedy for food. Where are the gods? Oh well. Here's some of those god headdresses. Okay, well, thank you for joining me. I think I'll leave us with an image of Grell. And I'm going to try to be back pretty soon, but we'll see. There's always something distracting me, I guess. But I'll talk to you all later. Hope you're having a good week reading comics.